friends, welcome back to Food Prep Guide. Let's talk about all those times that we clean out the fridge and throw away a bunch of slimy spinach or wrinkled bell peppers or something moldy that we can't even identify. We've all been there. I certainly have. Thankfully, there is a ridiculously simple way to make food last for months instead of days, and that's with dehydrating. Today, I want to share the 5 foods that have transformed how I shop and save and even what I choose to grow out in the garden. These aren't just random picks, but they are specific foods that I have identified can give the most value for your time and money. Before I jump into the list, I just want to note that I started dehydrating long before I ever tried canning. It just felt easier and less intimidating. It's basically just slice your food, put it on the trays, let the dehydrator do its thing. Plus, dried food takes up way less space than canned food. You can fit about 3 months worth of vegetables in a single cabinet. In fact, I have a vegetable cabinet, and that is exactly what it's dedicated to, is dehydrated vegetables of all sorts. But there's also the money savings aspects of dehydrating, which they go for canning too. But dehydrating allows you to buy it in produce in bulk when it's in season or grow it. But basically just getting it at its lowest price and locking it in by buying in bulk, dehydrating, and then enjoying those low prices that you locked in all the rest of the year. So what should you dehydrate first? After 7 years of trial and error, there are 5 foods that just make dehydrating so worth it to me, and I want to share those with you today. They are easy to prepare, versatile, and they'll save you some serious money. And by the way, if you happen to be watching this video before Sunday at midnight, our dehydrating one-on-one masterclass is still available with the free bonus, and I will link that in the description box below. Okay, let's move on. Let's go to food number 1, which is potatoes. I dehydrate potatoes 3 different ways: shreds, slices, and dices. And trust me, you will want all 3 in your pantry because they just meet a need for so many different recipes. Always with potatoes, you want to blanch them first. For shredded potatoes, I use my food processor with a shredding blade. It's actually a manual rotary type style. It takes about 5 minutes to shred a 5-pound bag that way if you have a motorized food processor. So I highly recommend going that route. Before dehydrating, you want to soak them in cold water for about 15 minutes to remove any excess starch because potatoes are, of course, very starchy. Drain that water off and then blanch. This is going to prevent it from turning brown and also help them rehydrate better and quicker later on. For slices and dices, I aim for a uniform thickness, whatever that size may be. Sometimes I do them super thin, sometimes a little bit thicker, but just consistency is key. You just want to make sure that they're all about the same size. I will note that if you go too thin, they can turn hard as a rock and have a hard time rehydrating to be not hard. So when potatoes go on sale for 99 cents a bag for about 5 pounds, I will buy 4 to 5 bags, especially if my homegrown potatoes didn't do good that year. One 5-pound bag gives about 2 quarts of dehydrated potatoes. You compared that to store-bought dehydrated potatoes at about $12 a quart. And I'm saving $40 or so every time I do a big batch of 20 to 25 pounds. As for how I use them, besides the obvious hash browns for shredded potatoes, I try adding the dices and chunks to potato soup. Most of the time, I will just let them rehydrate right there in the broth, especially if I'm using a crock pot. The slices make really incredible scalloped potatoes. I usually rehydrate them first and then just layer them with cheese sauce and whatever seasonings you want. Bake in the oven. Nobody can tell that they weren't fresh to begin with. Okay, food number 2 is cabbage. This surprises most people when I tell them that, and you'll see why in a minute. About why this made the cut when I mention what we make with it. But the prep is super simple. Just remove the core, remove the outer leaves. I will tell you that no matter how long you dehydrate those outer leaves, they are not going to be nice and pliable when you rehydrate them. They're going to stay really tough. You can still dehydrate the outer leaves, but I recommend dedicating those to powdering, and you can sprinkle those into smoothies or put them into like a superfood blend that you sprinkle on when you're trying to sneak in veggies for your kids or something like that. But if you're going for using them and specifically in recipes, then I recommend ditching the outer leaves for now. Stick to the inner head part. But basically, I shred it about the width of a pencil. Some people use a food processor, but I prefer to use a sharp knife for more control, specifically for cabbage. You don't need to pre-treat cabbage at all, no blanching, no soaking, just shred it and dehydrate it. We grow enough cabbage to meet our needs for the year, but you can grab cabbage on sale for 39 cents a pound around St. Patrick's Day. That's what I used to do. I used to buy 20 pounds at a time whenever it would hit that price. That was like my act now run to the store price. With inflation, I have no idea if it ever reaches 39 cents a pound, but I'm just kind of giving you a benchmark as much as I can. But each cabbage head, like just an average size cabbage, is going to dehydrate down to slightly less than a quart of dehydrated cabbage. Compare that to buying pre-dried cabbage at around $8 per ounce, and that's if you can even find it. It's not like it's really popular, but if you do that, you can save around $30 per batch of cabbage that way. Rehydration is key with cabbage. Always use boiling water. But if you're making soup that has like a lot of liquid in it, you can just throw it in dry and it'll rehydrate in the broth. But in general, I will always rehydrate my cabbage with boiling water. For whatever reason, it does not rehydrate well with just room temperature water or even, hot water. It stays, what's the word? I was about to say rubbery. I don't know if rubbery is the word, but it's kind of, I think rubbery probably is the word. Just rehydrate with boiling water. You don't have to worry about it. Okay, so my favorite recipes. This is why dehydrated cabbage earns a spot in my pantry every single year, and that is our fried cabbage side dish with bacon. You'll just rehydrate your cabbage while you are cooking the bacon, and then add the rehydrated cabbage to the pan with the bacon grease. Add some onions. If you have time to caramelize the onions first, even better. That's what I try to always do when I make this side dish. And then boom, we have a super quick side dish. And we grow the onions, and so this is not the bacon. I put 2 strips of bacon when I'm doing the side dish. So 1 pack of bacon, I will, when I get home from the store on my grocery shopping day, I dedicate 1 package of bacon because of 2 side dishes. And I will take out 2 strips and vacuum seal in these little 2-strip packages. Sometimes I'll even go ahead and get some kitchen shears, nice and clean, and just go ahead and cut the bacon strips into little cubes. And that just makes side dishes like this that much quicker to make. The second thing that we use it for is an unstuffed cabbage casserole. You would rehydrate your cabbage and then just layer it with layers of ground beef, rice, and tomato sauce, and just alternate those. Season it however you want. When I make the tomato sauce, I usually make that from my dehydrated tomato powder, which is another one on this list, but we'll get to that in a little bit in this video. Okay, number 3 is frozen mixed vegetables. This can save some serious time and money because frozen mixed vegetables are already prepped for you. They've already been blanched, they're already chopped, they're ready to go. But not only that, they're often fresher than the quote-unquote fresh vegetables at the grocery store because they're frozen at peak ripeness and typically within hours of harvest. Prep is literally just open the bags, spread it on the trays, no chopping, no blanching. It's probably the easiest thing you will ever dehydrate. Cost comparison. When they go on sale for less than $1 per bag, that's when I buy. And I will typically buy 20 bags at a time. It depends on what my garden did this year and how much I froze. Most of what comes out of the garden is is canned or dehydrated. I do very, very little freezing because of very limited freezer space and unreliable freezer space. So that will, alternate or depend on what came out of the garden that year. But regardless, when those bags hit less than $1 per bag, which is I think they're 15-ounce bags, so very slightly less than a pound, I'll try to buy 20 at a time. But each 1 pound, or we'll just say I think it's technically 15-ounce bags, dehydrates down to 1 heaping cup, which is kind of crazy, but you get major shrinkage with dehydrated food, so it shrinks down way more than you think it does. But those fancy freeze-dried vegetable, like number 10 cans, they are going to be anywhere between $15 to $20 for that same amount. You do the math on that, and you can save literally over $100 with 1 afternoon of dehydrating 15, 20 pounds of dried vegetables. I know dehydrated and freeze-dried is not the same thing. I have both machines, so I'm well aware of the differences. But when it comes to getting fresh food in a shelf-stable format, they both achieve that. And dehydrating does it much cheaper than a freeze dryer. My go-to recipes for using these is a quick pot pie filling. I will let the vegetables rehydrate while I am cooking up my cream of soup. Y'all know, if you're friends of the channel, y'all know that we ditched cans of cream of soups years ago, and we make it ourselves now. It only takes about 5 to 7 minutes. So I'll get all the other ingredients prepped and everything ready while the vegetables are rehydrating, and then just add it all to my pan or whatever form of pot pie that I'm making, whether it's an actual pie or whether it's the lazy man's casserole version that I do a lot of times. The other use is kind of like a rice pilaf, where we'll just add dried vegetables to the rice as we cook it. I always cook my rice in like a pressure cooker, like an Instant Pot, and I don't have to rehydrate them first. I'll just add a little bit more water than what I would if I was using just rice, and they rehydrate perfectly in that pressure cooker in about 6 minutes. It's awesome. Okay, number 4 favorite is tomatoes. Dehydrated tomato powder is like having a just add water tomato concentrate, but takes up a whole lot less space than all of those cans of tomato products. I don't know about you, but all those little cans of tomato paste always seem to get half used and then go moldy in the fridge. I inevitably do not remember to get them transferred into ice cube trays for freezing, which is the ideal thing to do. I inevitably forget that, and so half a can of paste always goes bad in my fridge. I switched to tomato powder, I think 2 years ago, is probably when I really made a point to stop buying tomato paste and tomato sauce. And it is, I'll never look back. To dehydrate the tomatoes and turn them into powder, which you don't have to turn them into the powder, but I just highly recommend that you try this. I just sliced the tomatoes about 1/4 of an inch thick. Roma tomatoes, paste tomatoes, those are going to be better for you because they have less juice and more meat, so they're going to dry quicker. They generally take 10 to 12 hours at around 125 degrees Fahrenheit, but that's going to change depending on where you are in the environment and all that. You want to get them completely dry. They should snap and not bend when they are completely dry. But let's look at the cost breakdown. Let's say you get tomatoes at $1 per pound during the summer. Now that's on the low end. They're usually a lot higher than that. But in the summer, when the tomatoes are in season, you can generally get them for $1 a pound or so. 10 pounds of tomatoes is going to reduce down to a pound of dried tomato powder. That is, I know that conversion is like mind-blowing, 10 pounds of tomatoes in a tiny little pint jar. But think about how much space that saves, and you can turn it into so many things. But that same amount of commercial tomato powder is going to cost you around $20. So you're looking at a 50% savings per batch. Plus, you know exactly what's in it. Doesn't have any other additives or anything. But to make the powder, once your slices are completely dry, you just blend them into a fine powder. You can use a food processor, you can use a blender, you can even use a coffee grinder. But I will say this, when you are grinding it, let the powder settle for a minute before opening your blender or food processor, unless you want to create a party of tomato dust cloud in your kitchen. I've done that many times. But once you turn this into a powder, it is just a matter of adding water in various increments to achieve tomato paste, tomato sauce, and tomato juice. You can even make a really quick tomato ketchup if you'd like. We have a whole video dedicated to that, and I will link it in the description box below. My favorite uses are like I said, tomato paste, tomato sauce, tomato juice, but to make a quick pizza sauce, to make an instant tomato soup with some cream, hot water, seasonings, some basil. Ooh, so good. I'm ready for summer to be here. But also just adding it to chili and other soups just to kind of thicken it up a little bit and give it kind of a deeper flavor. I will just sprinkle tomato powder, into soups and chilies like that for that reason. Okay, last but not least is going to be my mirepoix blend. This probably saves more time than anything else in my pantry because I generally don't have the patience for making the mirepoix blend for every single time I make a soup. Certainly when we're doing like a huge batch of a family dinner style soup, but when I'm making something quick for myself for lunch, I'm not going to go through the trouble of dicing up carrots and onions and celery and all that. But with this blend, you can, dehydrate it all, put them in a certain ratio in your pint jar, and, you're save a lot of time that way. The typical ratio for mirepoix is going to be 2 parts onion, 1 part carrot, and 1 part celery. You just want to dice everything into uniform small pieces somewhere in the 1/4 of an inch range. Just remember, consistency is more important than exact size. Cost comparison: when these vegetables are in season, I can make a quart of this dried mirepoix blend for about $5 versus something that you can buy at the store or Amazon is going to be $15 for just 8 ounces. So that's well over $50 savings per quart. I recommend keeping this in smaller jars, like half pints, rather than one big one, because every time you open the jar, you're exposing it to moisture. So I store these in half pint jars. Each half pint jar is enough to last me 5 to 6 large pots of soup, and this goes for anything that you're in and out of regularly. I think about my freeze dried garlic, and I think about my tomato powder because I'm in those all the time, almost daily, definitely, multiple times a week. And anytime you're in and out of a jar that often, it's best to give yourself smaller portions so that you're not having to expose the vast majority of your stock to that much air and moisture that often. For rehydrating, you basically want to do 1 part of your mixture to 3 parts of hot water. Just like anything else, the timing is going to vary, probably in the 15 to 20 minute range, but it's just going to vary as far as how long it takes to fully rehydrate. I will often just throw this straight into soups and stews and skip the kind of sauteing in butter step, but you can definitely still saute these in butter after rehydrating. If you don't, you miss out on the aromatics that is famous with the mirepoix, but sometimes I just need to, fix lunch and get back to work and not do all the fancy mirepoix and the butter and the aromatics and all of that stuff. So it really does save a lot of time. Using it, instant soup starter, that's probably the number one thing. But again, just like the the frozen mixed vegetables, a rice pilaf. So basically, anytime I'm making rice, I can throw in this mixture, this mirepoix blend, just a little bit of extra water in my pressure cooker, and it's ready in about 6 minutes. And those all the vegetables are fully rehydrated by the time that the rice is done cooking. So it just works out really well. That is it. If you are just getting started with dehydrating, these are the 5 vegetables that I recommend trying first. They are so multi-purpose, and they will probably pay for your dehydrator within the first few months of use. That's all for today, friends, and we will see you next time. Don't forget to check out that link to our dehydrating masterclass if you are interested in learning all the things dehydrating. We'll see you next time.